All right, today we are diving into a theory that might just flip your entire understanding of communication completely on its head. I mean, what if silence isn't actually empty? And what if the very way we test the human mind is fundamentally deeply flawed? And this quote, man, it just perfectly sums it up, right? It gets right to the heart of the whole problem. We're so often taught that if someone can't speak, they can't think. But this idea suggests something totally different, that silence isn't an absence of thought. It's just a barrier, a lock that we haven't figured out how to open yet. So, to really get this, we have to go back in time. For centuries, a certain way of thinking built what's been called an iron cage around countless minds. And this wasn't a prison of steel bars, no. It was a prison built from low expectations and just a massive misunderstanding of how the mind and body are even connected. To kind of get our heads around this mistake, we can actually look at a concept from yogic philosophy, the Annamaya Kosha. It's a fancy term, but it just means the physical body, this outer shell that we can see and touch. The whole argument is that for the longest time, science focused only on this physical layer, which led to this huge, flawed assumption about the mind that was living inside it. And here was the logic, and it was just brutally simple and devastatingly wrong. If someone had uncontrolled movements or they couldn't speak, the assumption was, well, the mind inside must be just as broken. No words coming out of the mouth meant no thoughts happening in the mind. Period. End of story. But a cage like that can't hold forever. Eventually, cracks started to show. And then proof just started pouring in. Proof of active, brilliant minds that had been hidden away. You had individuals, right, painstakingly tracing out letters on a board. And they weren't just asking for water. They were writing poetry. They were asking these deep philosophical questions. And even crazier, eye-tracking technology showed them looking at the right letter on a keyboard way, way before their uncooperative hand could ever get there. All of this new evidence was pointing to one single revolutionary conclusion. A fully active, intelligent mind was in there the whole time. The body was the prison, not the mind itself. And you can bet that a breakthrough this big was about to kick off one heck of a debate. So this new understanding, it led to the development of some pretty controversial new methods that claimed they could build a bridge to these silent minds. And the most famous of these was called facilitated communication. Okay, so let's get into this. The idea was, on the surface, pretty simple. A facilitator provides some light physical support, like a hand on an arm, to help a person get past their motor control issues so they can type out their thoughts. It was a revolutionary claim, for sure, but the scientific community was, let's just say, deeply skeptical. Of course, science had to step in. They had to put this huge claim to the test, and they turned to what they consider the gold standard of proof, the double-blind study. And, well, the results seemed to slam the door shut on the entire idea. And this chart, it really just lays out the core conflict perfectly. In these studies, they'd show a picture to the non-speaking person, but not the facilitator. And if the facilitator didn't know the answer, the correct answer was never typed. So the scientific conclusion felt inescapable. The messages were coming from the facilitator's own unconscious movements, not the other person. And for the scientific community, well, that was pretty much it. The debate was over. The method was bogus. The communication wasn't real. Case closed. But wait, this is where the story takes this really fascinating twist. Someone raised a critical question. What if the failure wasn't in the communication at all, but in the test itself? What if the whole experiment was basically designed to fail from the get-go? And this question leads us to a fascinating alternative theory. It wasn't really designed to defend facilitated communication, but more to ask, hey, what could really be happening in these moments of connection? It's a theory not about one mind speaking, but about two minds working together in a way we just don't understand. The theory is called pranic interdependence. Okay, let's break that down. Pranic comes from prana, life force energy, and interdependence just means they rely on each other. The core idea is that two people can become so connected that their minds create this shared energetic field, which makes a whole new kind of communication possible. It's wild. It suggests that maybe consciousness isn't always stuck inside one person's head. Now check this out. This is how the theory breaks down the roles. It suggests the non-speaker is operating in a deep, intuitive theta brainwave state. That's the state we associate with creativity and raw ideas. They're acting like a psychic capacitor, just holding all this potential. Meanwhile, the facilitator is in a calm, focused alpha state, acting as an energetic anchor. They provide the stability that's needed for those raw ideas to actually be channeled into a physical action, like typing. And this analogy just hits the nail on the head. Think about it. Jazz musicians have to be in sync, they're feeding off each other's energy, right? A double-blind test by isolating the two people is exactly like putting those musicians in separate soundproof rooms and then being shocked when the music stops. Of course it stops. You destroyed the very connection you were trying to measure. So, okay, if the old test is junk, how in the world could you test for this kind of invisible connection? Well, a pretty fascinating thought experiment was proposed to do just that. It's called the Dragon Trial. Here's how it would work. Step 1, an anchor secretly writes down some kind of complex fact. Step 2, a receiver just sits quietly, gets into a meditative state. Step 3, the anchor silently thinks of a question related to that secret fact. And finally, step 4, the receiver simply jots down the very first impression they get, a thought, an image, whatever pops into their head. And here is the absolute key difference. You are not looking for a perfect word-for-word answer like in the old tests. No. You're looking for what's called energetic overlap. A shared theme, a similar feeling, maybe a keyword. You're just looking for evidence that these two minds are actually sharing some kind of informational field. And that leaves us with this massive, fundamental question, right? Our entire model of consciousness is basically built on the idea of the isolated individual self. But what if that's not the whole picture? Theories like this one challenge us to really think, is communication always a solo performance? Or could it sometimes be a deep, symbiotic connection between two minds, a dance that science is only just beginning to learn the steps to?